Min-jae's death is discovered one gloomy morning when his eldest son screams in horror at his father's bloody body, lying motionless on the sofa. At first, everyone thinks it's a brutal break-in, but as the police begin to investigate, dark secrets are revealed, exposing the haunting relationship between Ji-eun, the seemingly perfect wife, and her ex-lover Dong-hyun. A cold-blooded murder plan has been set in motion, but is everything really as perfect as they think? Ji-eun grew up in a middle-class family in Seoul, where she was lovingly raised by her parents according to traditional Korean values. Her father is a famous banker, her mother is a model housewife. To outsiders, Ji-eun has it all: elegant beauty, knowledge, and a bright future. But the pressure from her family begins to weigh on her when she reaches the age of marriage. At 25, for a Korean woman, not being married means delay. Her parents worry, fearing that their daughter will not find a suitable husband if she does not act soon. Then Min-jae appeared, bringing with him the light of a perfect life. He was a successful electrical engineer, tall and handsome. Working in Dubai, Min-jae had a stable career and a high income. He was the one Ji-eun's parents thought would bring happiness to their daughter. The marriage was quickly arranged, and Ji-eun accepted it without any resistance. In the eyes of outsiders, they were a perfect couple, a dream family with a thriving career and the love of both families. The wedding was solemn, with all the traditional rituals. Ji-eun wore a light pink silk hanbok and walked among the blessings. Guests were bustling. From both families to Min-jae's colleagues from Dubai, it seemed like everything was happening like a fairy tale. But the truth is, from the moment Ji-eun accepted this marriage, she entered a dark path where there was no true love for Min-jae. Ji-eun's parents, who believe they have arranged a perfect marriage for her with a successful husband, constantly ask about her life. Her parents, especially her mother, constantly check on her, always asking about her married life and asking her to maintain a perfect family image. Every time Ji-eun tries to share about her loneliness and suffocation in marriage, her mother only responds with advice to preserve the family's dignity and honor. Your life must always be perfect, just like your parents worked hard to build it, her mother often says. This leaves Ji-eun feeling trapped, unable to honestly express her feelings without fear of disappointment from her family. After the wedding, Min-jae returns to Dubai to work. While Ji-eun continues to stay in Seoul at first, the two maintain regular contact through video calls. Min-jae always talked about his busy life in Dubai, about the future plans he wanted to share with her. But the distance in space and time gradually made their feelings grow cold. Ji-eun began to feel lonely in her own marriage. Every time Min-jae returned home, she felt an invisible distance between them, a wall that she could not break down. During the time Min-jae was away from home, Ji-eun's life was filled with an inescapable loneliness. The long days passed silently, as if invisible, as she stood alone in front of the empty house, with only the cold walls reflecting her sadness. Min-jae seemed to be just a distant shadow, and Ji-eun realized that their marriage had become a meaningless agreement. Time passed, they had 2 children together, but this still did not help their feelings progress any further. Then, fate decided to throw into her life someone she had never truly forgotten, Dong-hyun. He, the first love of her life, the one who made Ji-eun's heart burn with the most intense emotions, now suddenly appeared in her life. They used to love each other madly, but that love could not withstand the weight of family and society. Suffering from her family's disapproval, Ji-eun was forced to break up with Dong-hyun and enter a cold marriage with Min-jae. But deep down, her love for Dong-hyun never faded. It was like an unhealed wound hidden deep under the peaceful shell she had created for herself. One day, at a reunion of old friends, Ji-eun sat in the middle of a bustling crowd, unaware that fate had arranged an inevitable reunion. Dong-hyun entered the room, and when their eyes met, time seemed to stand still. In that moment, the whole space became quiet. All the surrounding sounds became faint, leaving only the 2 of them, a love buried in the past. And the fire that had been smoldering for many years suddenly flared up strongly. For Dong-hyun, this reunion was not simply a reunion with an old love. He carried a silent resentment towards Min-jae, the person he considered the reason he lost Ji-eun in the past. When he saw Min-jae having everything he had ever dreamed of, from career to family, the hatred in his heart grew. If it weren't for Min-jae, everything would have belonged to me, he told himself every time he remembered. Jealousy, mixed with blind love for Ji-eun, makes him unable to control himself. This time, Dong-hyun doesn't just want to win back Ji-eun, he wants to win back everything he believes he deserves. Dong-hyun is no longer the poor boy that Ji-eun once loved. He has transformed into a successful, elegant man working at a large construction company in Seoul. This change only makes him more attractive in Ji-eun's eyes. His sharp eyes now carry confidence, full of invitation and temptation. Ji-eun's emotions surge, a mixture of surprise, joy, and a vague fear that she is about to embark on a journey of no return. That look was like a hidden signal, and not long after they started talking to each other again. At first it was just a gentle greeting, like two old friends meeting by chance. But every word, every story exchanged through text messages stirred up memories of a time of crazy, intense love. Every line seemed to rekindle the romantic feeling that Ji-eun had tried to bury deep for a long time. She read and reread Dong-hyun's messages, her eyes filled with passion. At first, Ji-eun tried to convince herself that these were just harmless conversations, a way to ease her loneliness. But gradually, all the barriers began to collapse. Every time they talked, the distance between the past and the present was further blurred. Dong-hyun was not just a man in her memories, but someone who had ignited the fire of desire in Ji-eun's heart. The feeling of missing him became an obsession that could not be extinguished, and she was drawn into a vortex that she could not resist. Dong-hyun told Ji-eun about the years he spent trying to build his career, about his regret at having to leave her, and how her image had always existed in him like an imprint that would never fade. Faced with those confidences, Ji-eun could not control herself. She realized that, despite time, her heart had always been with Dong-hyun, and this time she did not want to give up. At first, Ji-eun felt guilty every time she thought of Min-jae. She knew she was cheating on her husband, who had devoted his entire career to taking care of the family. But her feelings for Dong-hyun were so strong that they overwhelmed all the reason and morality she once believed in. Ji-eun gradually let down her guard and began to sink deeper into this illicit affair like an addict seeking his drug. They began to meet more often, on secret evenings when Min-jae was away. Every time they were together, Ji-eun felt like her love for Dong-hyun was being revived, becoming more passionate than ever. At first, each meeting was filled with longing and repression, as if time was not enough for them to satisfy the longing that had accumulated during the years apart. But as time went on, the temptation between them became more intense and bold. The feeling of guilt is gradually pushed away by the passion of forbidden love. For Ji-eun, Min-jae gradually becomes a shadow in her life, while Dong-hyun occupies her mind. The old love is like a storm that sweeps away all morals and boundaries, bringing them to the brink of making wrong decisions. And from there, a dangerous path is opened up, a path that Ji-eun did not know she was walking down, with no way out. Min-jae's return from Dubai does not bring Ji-eun the joy it should have. Instead, each passing day becomes a series of nightmares that weigh heavily on her mind. There was a time when Ji-eun told herself that she would try to fulfill her responsibilities as a wife, try to love Min-jae, but all those thoughts are now in vain. Every time Min-jae enters the room, every time his deep voice rings out, she does not feel closeness or love, only guilt and unexplained resentment. She cannot look straight into his eyes without feeling suffocated by despair. The long nights with Min-jae became terrible for Ji-eun. She always tried to avoid him, using tiredness or work stress as excuses to avoid physical intimacy. But Min-jae was not stupid. He gradually felt his wife's distance. She was no longer the Ji-eun he knew and loved. Her every gesture, every word, every look carried a terrifying coldness. He tried his best to understand, to pull her closer to him. The dinners he prepared himself, the short trips to the beach to warm up their feelings were all met with incomprehensible coldness by Ji-eun. Min-jae doesn't know what the real reason is, but he doesn't give up. To save his marriage, he decides to give up everything: his stable job, his high salary, and his life in Dubai. He quits his job and decides to move back to Busan, where his family can be closer. He hopes that the geographical proximity and the time spent with his family will bring Ji-eun back. But for Ji-eun, this decision is just the final blow to the door of freedom she once longed for. All her hopes of seeing Dong-hyun again, of having passionate secret dates, are now suffocated by Min-jae's presence. She feels like she's trapped in a marriage that she never really belonged to, and with each passing day, the burden only gets heavier, squeezing her every breath. The more suffocating Ji-eun becomes, the deeper she is drawn into the spiral of obsession with Dong-hyun. The secret conversations become her only solace, the only faint light in her dark life. But Dong-hyun is no longer patient. He begins to push Ji-eun into bold and crazy thoughts. She feels the change in Dong-hyun's words, from sweet conversations to pressing urges. He no longer wants to wait. Min-jae's existence has now become an unacceptable barrier. With each passing day, Min-jae takes up more space in Ji-eun's life, and this makes Dong-hyun feel insecure. The fear of losing Ji-eun gradually turns into an obsession. They begin to meet secretly more often, short but suffocating meetings where Dong-hyun constantly mentions a solution to all their problems: kill Min-jae. In the days that followed, Ji-eun lived in a state of extreme tension. Dong-hyun did not let her go, did not give her time to think. The idea of eliminating Min-jae was no longer just a crazy thought. It began to creep in, becoming a real and inevitable prospect. Every time she looked at Min-jae, Ji-eun no longer saw the husband she had sworn to spend the rest of her life with. He was only an obstacle, a roadblock on the path to the freedom and happiness she longed for. The hatred in her heart burned stronger every day, and the idea of killing Min-jae became more attractive and inescapable. To be free, to be able to live with the man she truly loved, Ji-eun saw no other way out than to eliminate Min-jae forever. She no longer thought about the consequences, no longer cared about what would happen next. All she could think about was freedom. Freedom from this suffocating marriage, freedom from Min-jae, and freedom from the very life she thought would forever bind her. Ji-eun and Dong-hyun planned coldly and ruthlessly. Nothing was left out, no detail was forgotten. She would clear the way, making sure that Min-jae would not suspect anything, and Dong-hyun would be the one to carry out that ruthless job. Step by step, the plan was laid out like a complete picture, with no loopholes, no possibility of escape. Everything was ready. Min-jae would die, and with him, all the barriers in Ji-eun's life would disappear. On May 1st, Ji-eun, Min-jae, and their 2 sons boarded the train to Seoul. On the surface, the trip seemed as smooth as ever, but inside Ji-eun was a storm of emotions. Everything was arranged, and she knew the terrible plan was drawing closer. Upon returning to Seoul, Min-jae takes his children shopping for Chuseok, a warm family reunion that he cherishes. While Min-jae takes his children shopping for Chuseok, Ji-eun remains at home with a single mission: to pave the way for crime. Dong-hyun was already waiting when Ji-eun stealthily invited him over. Without saying much, he quietly hid in the back room, ready to carry out his cruel task. Min-jae and the children returned without knowing. The dinner was cozy, seemingly a peaceful family, but Ji-eun was just waiting for the night to fall. Everything was ready, but when the happy laughter of Min-jae and the 2 children echoed through the walls, Dong-hyun's heart couldn't help but be shaken. The laughter of that family, the happiness that Min-jae was having, was like a knife piercing deep into his mind. He felt more indignant than ever. That happiness should have belonged to him and Ji-eun, but instead Min-jae, the person he hated, was enjoying the life that he deserved. Anger flared up in Dong-hyun's heart, making his will to kill Min-jae even stronger. He no longer saw himself as an outsider, but as someone reclaiming what had been stolen. Night fell, and everyone fell asleep. At exactly 3 a.m., Ji-eun got out of bed, her heart pounding with tension. She walked into the darkness, waking up Dong-hyun, who was waiting. Without a word, the 2 of them quietly entered the living room, where Min-jae was sleeping soundly on the sofa. Under the dim light, Dong-hyun tightly gripped the cast iron pan. The anger that had been building up in his heart now reached its peak. He delivered the first powerful blow to Min-jae's head, the impact sounding cold and deadly. Min-jae didn't have time to react, only a weak movement before the second and third blows landed, ending his life. The room was now completely silent. Blood was splattered on the sofa, and Min-jae was dead. Ji-eun stood there, looking at her husband's body, feeling no remorse. In her heart, there was only relief, as the final burden had been lifted. Dong-hyun left the house soon after, leaving no trace. Ji-eun locked the door and went back to bed as if nothing had happened. But the false peace of the night was only the beginning of the worst that was to come. The next morning, screams rang out from the living room as Min-jae's eldest son discovered his father's body. The boy cried out in horror, and the screams quickly shook the entire house. Ji-eun rushed out of the room, her face showing shock and grief. She held her son tightly in a perfect pretense, but her heart was empty and numb. Neighbors quickly poured in, and the police were called to the scene. Ji-eun and Dong-hyun's plan seemed perfect, but the traces and the truth could not be covered up forever. Min-jae's death was only the beginning of the inevitable collapse. Min-jae's death quickly became a high-profile case. The police noticed something unusual from the start, finding no trace of a break-in. The windows and doors were intact, with no signs of forced entry. The only thing missing was Ji-eun's necklace, which puzzled them. Why would a robber take only that small item, leaving the more valuable possessions in the house untouched? Despite Ji-eun's anguished appearance and tears, suspicions continued to rise. The detectives watched her every move. Although she appeared desperate on the outside, there was something in her eyes that made them uneasy, too calm, too cautious. Like an actress playing her role too well, they knew something darker was hiding. As the police decide to dig deeper into the details, Ji-eun's story begins to unravel. Her testimony about the two intruders fails to explain how they got into the house without leaving any traces. Furthermore, when they checked Ji-eun's phone, they discovered that she had almost no contact with Min-jae while he was in Dubai, which raises further doubts about the couple's true relationship. The investigation begins to delve deeper into Ji-eun's life, and from there, things start to unravel. Some neighbors recall seeing a strange man at Ji-eun's house when Min-jae was not around. This raises further suspicions that Ji-eun may be having an affair. The police decide to search more closely and discover a second phone, one that Ji-eun never mentioned. It was filled with text messages between Ji-eun and a man named Dong-hyun, her ex-lover. The messages were not only filled with words of love, but also discussions about how to kill Min-jae. Each conversation, each text message appeared like a dark picture, painting a meticulous and evil plan. They discussed everything, from choosing the time when Min-jae was asleep to how to stage the crime scene to fool the police. When evidence from the second phone was revealed, not only was Ji-eun's affair exposed, but the murder plan was also brought to light. When the police summoned Dong-hyun, he immediately realized that he could no longer hide. At first, he tried to deny any involvement, claiming that he was just an ex-lover who knew nothing about Min-jae's death. But when he was confronted with the text messages, the murder plans discussed in detail on the phone, all his pretense of confidence began to crumble. The pressure from the interrogation gradually caused Dong-hyun to collapse. He began to confess little by little, as if pieces of the horrifying memory were coming back. Dong-hyun recounted that Ji-eun was the one who initiated the idea of killing Min-jae. At first, he didn't take her seriously, but when he saw Ji-eun becoming more and more obsessed with killing her husband, he was drawn into that vortex. At some point, Dong-hyun himself became obsessed with the idea of eliminating Min-jae so that he could live with Ji-eun forever. Ji-eun could not believe that Dong-hyun could accuse her like that. In a panic, Ji-eun sobbed, not because of remorse for Min-jae's death, but because of fear of the end she was facing. She admitted that her feelings for Min-jae had long since died, and his return only added to her despair. This marriage was nothing more than a cage that held her, and her crazy love for Dong-hyun had clouded all reason. Ji-eun saw no other way out but to get rid of Min-jae forever. With Ji-eun and Dong-hyun's confessions, the picture of this gruesome murder became clear. The police arrested both of them, and the Korean public was shocked by the brutality and coldness of this murder plan. Both Ji-eun and Dong-hyun were sentenced to life in prison after a long, intense trial. The horrifying details of how they planned to kill Min-jae were revealed to the public, leaving people unable to believe the extent of Ji-eun's cruelty. Min-jae's family not only lost a loved one, but was also completely destroyed by the crime of Ji-eun, the wife they once loved and trusted. Ji-eun and Min-jae's two children, now without both their parents, became the real victims of the case. The trauma of their father's death and their mother's betrayal will haunt them for the rest of their lives.